Saturday, November 30th, 2024, Maneko 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So I think it's very important for us as individuals to be very vigilant. And what I mean by that, well, we need to be on the lookout for promises from politicians, from whoever, right? The person or the man or the woman on the white horse that's going to save us all. And the reason I'm going to talk about this today is because I think we're in for a turbulent next 4 months. So by the end of March 2025, I think the world might have changed massively. And I don't know how it will change or what crisis they're going to generate for us, because I think we're still being run by a small group of people. And yes, there's hope that in the United States that's going to change, because we've got a new administration coming in that's going to fight back. Well, I'm skeptical. Yes, it would be nice, but I'm skeptical. And there's a lot of talk, of course, a lot of optimism. And one of the things people are optimistic about is the monetary system. On the precious metal side, of course, there's talk of gold backing for the dollar. We've seen one of Trump's economic advisors, Judy Shelton, write a book, As Good as Gold, and I've read that book. And her proposal is to back some treasury bonds with gold, and to bring back sound money like that. I'm not too sure about that. One thing that I did not see in her book is a call to end the Fed. She just wants to bring the Fed under control, it seems. And I don't think that's enough. And then we have also the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency crowd being very optimistic that the Trump administration is going to be very pro-Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. We're even hearing people propose or say that the U.S. is going to have Bitcoin reserves, that it's going to sell some of its gold reserves to buy Bitcoin. Yeah, so there's a lot of hopium out there about the monetary system. And then we've also had the nomination of the presumptive U.S. Secretary of the Treasury. I've spoken about Scott Bessent, and he's even very positive gold, and it's his biggest position. Does that mean that he wants to bring sound money back to America? Not necessarily. And I've done a little bit more research on Scott Bessent. And some of you might be or are probably following things a lot closer than I do, transition-wise, and the people that President Trump is nominating for his cabinet. Some of the nominations people are not happy with. Some of them they're very happy with. And yes, it's the old vigilance I was talking about, that we need to be very careful. And I still believe that if America really wants to go back to some inkling of freedom, of individual freedom, we must reverse back to before 1913, when the Fed was created. And I'm gonna quote here Charles Lindbergh Sr. He was a congressman, and he was the father, of course, of Charles Lindbergh Jr., the aviator. And this is what he said after the Federal Reserve Act was established or passed in Congress. And I quote, This Federal Reserve Act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president, Woodrow Wilson, signs this bill, the invisible government of the monetary power will be legalized. The worst legislative crime of the ages is perpetrated by this banking and currency bill. So he said that after it passed in the Senate and before President Wilson signed it into law. And I think he's right. And we're seeing optimism, of course, about the topic of ending the Fed. Even Elon Musk has gotten involved in it. The other day, I think it was a couple of days ago, he retweeted a tweet by Rand Paul, which I thought was interesting. As you can see here, Rand Paul says, decisions, happy Thanksgiving to you and yours. One must go. So it's got all the good stuff that Americans eat at Thanksgiving: turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, green bean casserole, bread, mashed potatoes, sweet potato casserole, pumpkin pie. You get the idea. But then in the middle it has the Fed. It's very easy, isn't it? One must go. So the major thing I think we need to be vigilant about, and that's why I wasn't too keen on As Good as Gold, Judy Shelton's book. It's kind of disappointing because she went through how important having sound money is. Gold, silver, a physical monetary commodity, and that the market should decide what the rate of a loan should be, not a committee of 12 men and women at the Federal Reserve Board in Washington, D.C. They shouldn't decide where short-term rates should be, nor should they try to also manipulate longer-term rates like they do through QE, through creating basically currency and central bank money out of thin air. And what's disappointing about all this is that she writes about how the Constitution provides for that, for basically gold and silver being the coin, being the money. But at the same time, she doesn't call for the Fed to be abolished. And I think herein lies the problem, and I'm not sure how important Judy Shelton will be for the Trump administration. There's a lot of speculation, of course. The problem with this is that by trying to tame the Fed or reform the Fed, you don't end the Fed. And I was talking about a major crisis being highly probable in the next 4 months. So it's almost exactly 4 months. And why do I say that? Well, because back in 2020, when we had the last major crisis kick off, and you all know what that crisis was, I thought it was engineered. Maybe not right in the beginning, but in the next week or two that I looked into things, I thought, well, this smells. This smells. And I found this document from the World Bank, and I'm going to put a link below in the description, and you can look at it. And they're telling us in plain sight, the World Bank, which is part of the United Nations, part of all the United Nations, of course, was created by the globalists. It was J.D. Rockefeller Jr., I think, who gave Trygve Lie the $8 million check or so to build the headquarters in Manhattan. Yes, he didn't do it out of his heart, good heart. He did it for something in return because, well, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the bankers, they run the UN, of course. But this was interesting when I saw this back in 2020. So it's the World Bank's COVID-19 Strategic Preparedness and Response Program. Bit of a mouthful, but the most interesting thing about this document are the dates that they give you. So expected project approval date, 2nd of April 2020. And it's interesting, it reminds me of what happened in 2001 with 9/11, that they had something in response to that right away. It was the Patriot Act, right? Here they had this ready at the World Bank, this preparedness program. And the interesting point about this dateline is that it says expected project closing date 31st of March 2025. And you might be saying, well, Trump wanted to end the WHO. Trump might leave the UN. Well, he did say he was going to end the WHO. It was, I think, in the beginning of 2020. But it would only take effect from 2021. So we know what happened in 2020 and 2021, and he never became president, and he didn't stay as president, so the WHO was still there. So I'm trying to say, focus more on what people do, not what they tell you. And I think if you are a bit of a researcher like I am, some people might call it a conspiracy theorist. I don't mind though. But if you research the past and you look at things, you will find that there are a lot of changes of administration that coincide with big major crises that have changed America and the world massively. And I don't know if the next change is going to be for better or worse. But just look back at 1860. Lincoln got elected. What did we get in 1861? Civil War breaks out. Let's go to FDR. Gets elected in 32. Yes, things are already pretty tough. We had the crash in 29. The Great Depression had kicked off. Unemployment was through the roof. Banks were failing. But he came in, right, and changed everything. He changed the way Americans lived and thought. He changed the relationship between government and the public. Right? He brought in the New Deal, which is basically the welfare state. And yes, that was a change of administration there from Hoover to Roosevelt. Massive, massive changes there that we are actually looking at the consequences now. He also took America domestically from sound money. And we're definitely feeling the effects of that with endless debt and deficit spending. And even if we go back to when the Fed was created, you might think that was a convenient time that the Fed was created and put to work, because the Fed actually started operating in 1914. And what happened in 1914? Well, America didn't get into World War I, but the major European nations did, and they needed financing. And what better way to finance themselves through this new Federal Reserve system that happened to be created just a few months before the war kicked off. That happened to be created with the impetus of Mr. Warburg, Felix Warburg, who was at Jekyll Island, whose brother was part of the imperial German government and a German banker, it all really seems convenient, doesn't it? And as I said, be careful with these crises. And what other change of administrations have brought in crises? Well, we can go to 1980. Of course, the Iranian hostage crisis was in full flow back from 1979 to 1980. You had a massive inflation. You had the dollar going down the drain. You had interest rates at 20%. You had the worst recession since the Great Depression. And you get a new administration, Ronald Reagan. He's going to bring in small government, right? He said government is the problem. But you look back at how much he spent. He was the president in the last 60 years or so that increased the national debt the most. So vigilance, as I've said before, and even 2001, George W. Bush won that hanging Chad election against Al Gore. What happened 8 months after he became president and changed not just America, but changed the world in terms of the powers of government to surveil people? I mean, I remember how much easier and much more convenient it was to travel prior to 2001. A lot of young people don't know how easy it was. There wasn't any of this security stuff through airports. So even in 2008, let's keep going with the crises and the change of administrations. 2008, well, the great financial crisis, the collapse of Wall Street, of the Wall Street banks because of their irresponsible activities in the over-the-counter market in derivatives in relationship to the subprime mortgage housing bubble. Well, that happened a month or two before the election. And the world changed back then as well because we had the central banks come in and do something they'd never done before as a collective, and that was to print trillions upon trillions of dollars. They drove rates to 0%, some to negative, and then came in, of course, the Obama administration. He was bringing hope and change. So now we've had this crazy period of division since 2016, and now we've got Trump coming back to clean things up, right? So what I'm trying to say here, brace yourselves, I think, for a major crisis. And what do I think the objective of the powers that be is now? Well, it's going to be more control. Think about CBDC. And I know Trump said that there will be no central bank digital currency under his watch, but they could easily reform the Fed, rein in the Fed, and say, yes, we're going to have a Fed coin, but it's going to be outsourced through the private sector. But that's just as bad. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it could be one of the things. Ideally, of course, I'm wrong about all this, and Trump is for real. There's a major crisis in the next 4 months. He abolishes the Federal Reserve. He abolishes the IRS. He abolishes the legal tender laws that came in through Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. I think it was 1862. Interesting how all these draconian laws and directives that take away the individual's liberties always comes during these big crises, right? And they always leave it on the books. So hope that would be great if Trump did that. abolish the Fed, bring in some, well, you don't even have to bring in sound money if you abolish the Fed and the legal tender laws. The Constitution is right there. You know, the U.S. Mint is right there to mint your money. But we'll have to wait and see about that. And one of the reasons I'm a little more skeptical after looking at Scott Bessent, and you can look at him yourself, go through Wikipedia, is this. It says, Bessent chairs the investment committee and is a member of the executive committee on the board of the Rockefeller University. Bessent formerly served on the board of God's Love We Deliver, an organization founded to deliver meals for homebound people with AIDS. Nothing wrong about that, I guess. He's a trustee of Classical American Homes Preservation Trust. Yeah, pretty harmless. But one thing that caught my attention is this here. Bessent is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations.
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
And of course, he's worked for George Soros. Yes, worked for George Soros. And he's also an admirer of Shinzo Abe's Abenomics, which would mean more and more money printing, yield curve control, and a weaker dollar, I would say. But let's look at the Council on Foreign Relations, because that's the part that makes me very skeptical and the part that makes me want to warn you about being vigilant. And it's going to take a little while. I'm going to go through the Council on Foreign Relations here from Wikipedia. It says the CFR is an American think tank, right? Sounds very harmless. Specializing in U.S. foreign policy and international relations, founded in 1921. It is an independent and nonpartisan nonprofit organization. CFR is based in New York City with an additional office in Washington, D.C. It's interesting that if it's nonpartisan, why does it need an office in Washington, D.C.? Anyway, its membership has included senior politicians, secretaries of state, CIA directors, bankers, lawyers, professors, corporate directors, CEOs, and prominent media figures. Not Alex Jones, of course. More mainstream. CFR meetings convene government officials, global business leaders, and prominent members of the intelligence and foreign policy committees to discuss international issues. CFR publishes the bi-monthly journal Foreign Affairs since 1922. It also runs the David Rockefeller Studies program. There's that David Rockefeller again, which makes recommendations to presidential administrations and the diplomatic community, testifies before Congress, interacts with the media, and publishes research on foreign policy issues. Michael Froman is the organization's 15th president. Well, I can't talk about the CFR without looking at its origins. So, history. In September 1917, near the end of World War I, well, there's another crisis there, President Woodrow Wilson established a working fellowship of about 150 scholars called the Inquiry, tasked with briefing him about the options for the post-war world after Germany was defeated. This academic group, directed by Wilson's closest advisor and longtime friend, Colonel Edward House. He's an interesting guy, Edward M. House. And with Walter Lippmann as head of research, met to assemble the strategy for the post-war world. The team produced more than 2,000 documents detailing and analyzing the political, economic, social facts globally that would be helpful for Wilson in peace talks. Their report formed the basis of the 14 points which outline Wilson's strategy for peace after the war's end. These scholars then traveled to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919 and participated in discussions there. As a result of discussions at the Peace Conference, a small group of British and American diplomats and scholars met on May 30th, 1919 at the Hotel Majestic in Paris. They decided to create an Anglo-American organization called the Institute of International Affairs, which would have offices in London and New York. Ultimately, the British and American delegates formed separate institutes, the British developing the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House, also known as Chatham House. Due to the isolationist views prevalent in American society at the time, the scholars had difficulty gaining traction with their plan and turned their focus instead to a set of discrete meetings, which had been taking place since June 18th in New York City under the name Council on Foreign Relations. The meetings were headed by corporate lawyer Elijah Root, who had served as Secretary of State under President Theodore Roosevelt, and attended by 108 high-ranking officers of banking, manufacturing, trading, and finance companies, together with many lawyers. The members were proponents of Wilson's internationalism. Yes, not isolationism. But they were particularly concerned about the effect that the war and the Treaty of Peace might have on post-war business. The scholars from the inquiry saw an opportunity to create an organization that brought diplomats, high-level government officials, and academics together with lawyers, bankers, industrialists to influence government policy. On July 29, 2021, they filed a certification of incorporation, officially forming the Council on Foreign Relations. So, in the late 1930s, the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation began financially supporting the Council. In 1938, they created various committees on foreign relations, which later became governed by the American Committees on Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C., throughout the country, funded by a grant from the Carnegie Corporation. So what I'm trying to say here is that the Council on Foreign Relations is just the American arm, really, of Chatham House, the Royal Institute for International Affairs. Those who are hoping that maybe Trump is going to break away from Europe, bring back isolationism. Yes, that might be so, but I wouldn't jump the gun yet, because his Secretary of the Treasury is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. So was Dick Cheney. And the other thing that's really interesting about Mr. Bessent is that he also supports the Prince's Trust. What's the Prince's Trust? Well, now it's called the King's Trust. It's a United Kingdom-based charity founded in 1976 by King Charles III. So there you go. That's Scott Bessent. And he's going to be Secretary of the Treasury. So, vigilance, people. And hopefully I'm wrong about all this. But as I've said many times in the past, maybe I haven't said this. I vote for myself every day I wake up in the morning. So what I'm trying to say here, yes, don't think that these politicians and these bureaucrats, whoever they are there for your own interest. Yes, I heard Scott Bessent saying that we need to rebalance things because there's a lot of wealth inequality in the U.S. We need to bring the working people back into the fray, and that is a good thing. How can we keep our sovereignty as individuals? Well, as I always say, have a little bit of real money, the money that the founding fathers believed was really important to have, and they wrote it down in the Constitution, gold and silver. With that, I'm going to wish you all a very good rest of the weekend. Take care. Bye.